Today we are going to be practicing using measurements from an EagleView or measurements that have been taken by yourself or measurements obtained through the insurance paperwork to determine how much ice and water barrier needs to be ordered, and then subsequently how much felt needs to be ordered. The synthetic felt is the most complicated step out of any of the ordering information that we have, simply because to do it correctly first, you have to figure out how much square footage of ice and water barrier is needed for the house, which takes 2 to 3 steps, and then you need to convert, or then you need to use that information to determine how much squares of felt needs to be ordered, which takes 2 steps, and then you need to convert from felt to rolls of felt, from squares of felt to rolls of felt. A couple of notes about ice and water barrier. Ice and water barrier is the second type of underlayment that we typically use in all northern markets. The main focus for ice and water barrier is to prevent ice damming, which we can talk about a little bit later in detail. The second form of underlayment that we use is the synthetic felt. Ice and water barrier is code in most northern markets, and the code requires us to install it 24 inches in from the exterior wall. So there's a little formula that we can show you that will tell you how much coverage is actually needed by code. But for us, and for all intensive purposes, we are going to be installing 2 rows of ice and water barrier along the eaves on every house, and 1 row up the valleys, as well as we will be installing ice and water barrier on anywhere that's under a 412 pitch and around flashings and in some other situations. In terms of how to calculate the ice and water barrier, we're going to walk through that using this EagleView and using some of the instructions in this updated ordering cheat sheet. So first I'm going to go down to the measurement portion of the EagleView. And here has all of my main measurements that we're going to need. The 2 measurements that are necessary to determine how much ice and water barrier needs to be ordered is your eaves measurement and your valley measurement, if applicable. There's a couple ways you can get this. Either if you have an EagleView, obviously it has it right on here. Sometimes you're able to determine these amounts through the little picture of the EagleView that they'll include on the insurance estimate, or you can figure it out using gutter lengths or ridge length and some other complicated things. But if you can't do that, the easiest way that takes a little bit more time is just get up on the roof and measure it, because this is going to be crucial to determine how much ice and water barrier and felt we order, so that you're not making a bunch of extra trips on the days of construction. So first we're going to be doing the ice and water barrier. So we're going to take a look at the instructions first, and it says ice and water barrier, round to the nearest whole number. To figure out square feet of ice and water barrier, follow the instructions below. Like I mentioned, in some markets we don't actually install the ice and water barrier. So we're gonna first, because we don't have ice and water barrier in square feet, we're gonna go below to steps for calculating ice and water barrier, square feet, and felt in squares.
So step 1 says to multiply the eaves measurement in linear feet by 2, since we're installing 2 rows of ice and water barrier on the eaves. So we are going to take our 207 feet and we're going to multiply that by 2 to get 414 linear feet of ice and water barrier for the eaves. Now step 2 says add in the valley measurement in linear feet if the house has valleys. Now obviously this house does have valleys. You can see it as this dotted line here. And so we're going to take our 414 feet and we're going to add in our 157 feet for a valley measurement. And we're going to come up with 571 linear feet of ice and water barrier for our total. Step 3 then says convert the linear feet into square feet by multiplying the eaves and valleys measurement by 3, since 1 row of ice and water barrier is 3 feet wide. So for step 3, we're going to take our 571 linear feet, we're going to multiply that by 3, and come out with 1,713 square feet of ice and water barrier. So now that we have that ice and water barrier, we can go back up above to the ice and water barrier, and it says if you have the ice and water barrier in square feet, then all you must do is divide the total amount by 200. So we're going to take our 1,713 and we're going to divide that by 200, and we're going to come up with 8.57, which with our rounding rules, it says round up to the nearest whole number, and especially with ice and water barrier, we're going to want to round up to the nearest whole number because they can use this around the flashings. They can use it. They can sometimes have a little bit of waste on it, so we always want to have a little bit more ice and water barrier, because also if we have any extra, we can just take that to our next job. So we're going to have 9 rolls of ice and water barrier. Now let's go back down to the rest of the steps for the felt. So it says step 4, and now we're working on felt. Take the total tear off and subtract what is going to be covered with ice and water barrier to find out how much is going to be covered by felt. So we're going to need to go up in this eagle view to where our square footage is for the house. And for step 4, we're going to take our 5,921 square feet on the house, and we are going to subtract our 1,713 square feet of ice and water barrier to come up with 4,208 square feet of felt. Now step 5 says convert square feet of felt to squares of felt by dividing our square feet of felt by 100, because 100 square feet is equal to 1 square. After this, we're going to complete the instructions in the felt section above to convert to rolls of felt. So step 5, we're going to take our 4,208, divide that by 100, come up with 42.08 squares of felt. Then we're going to go back above to our felt section, and it says calculate how many rolls of felt to order after calculating how many rolls of ice and water barrier to order. So good, we've checked that off. And if it says if you have how many squares of felt is needed, then simply divide by 10. This is because each roll of felt covers 10 squares. So then we're going to take our 42.08, and we're going to divide that by 10, come out with 4.208. We're going to look at our rounding rules, and it says round up to the nearest whole number, so we're going to be ordering 5 rolls of felt on this house. So that will wrap up how to finish and how to take measurements from an eagle view or hand measured to determine how much ice and water barrier and how much felt to order. We're going to be using this all the time on every single insurance estimate as well. We're going to need to double check that the measurements they have are correct, so that we're not having to take a bunch of extra trips to the supplier to get extra rolls of ice and water or felt. So this is something that's going to be super crucial in the day-to-day working life.